goes, you're only going to get through this by the grace of God. And I said, I know that, Ken. I mean, I'm praying. But no, he said, no. Here's how I want to explain it to you. What are you going to do tonight after you leave here? I said, I'm exhausted. I'm going to go home. I'm going to go to bed. He goes, okay. When you get in the car, pray that God will give you the grace to get to where you sleep. And when you lay down to go to sleep, pray that God will give you the grace to sleep until morning. And then when you get up in the morning, pray that God will give you the grace to make it to noontime. Are you starting to understand what I'm saying? Then you pray for the grace to get from noontime. You don't pray to God for grace to get you through this event. That's not how you should be doing this. You live hour by hour when you go through these kind of things.
So this week, I had a deacon of mine from Meadow Heights that he's just a guy that when I was there, he'd always come over and work at my house. And he calls me up and he's like, hey, I want to come to your house and help you work on stuff. And I was like, Steve, what do you mean you want to come to my house and work on my stuff? He's like, I'll pull up my trailer. I don't care if you're there. Just want to, I know we had mold in our basement, and one of the tests for the kids came back really high for mold. So I was like, we got to get this taken care of. Mm-hmm. And so he pulled his trailer up, and yesterday we ripped out a whole side of my basement wall, ripped out the window, ripped out the door, and put everything back in place. And then Hannah came home, and it didn't look anything like when she left that morning. Oh, okay. So it was this major transformation that take place in our house where you left in the morning and the window's half as big as it was when you left. The door we just completely blocked in, so it's not even there anymore. And it's got all new wood and all new plywood, and all the siding's going to be brand new and all that kind of stuff. And so it's interesting how transformation, even in just one day, how much transformation can take place. You've been going to the gym.
Oh, good.
How has that transformation gone for you? Do you look any different today than when you started?
Yeah, you can go back and look at previous episodes of this podcast, and I might look the exact same.
I have a picture of you with your shirt off where we can take that and compare it.
I don't think they need to see that.
I don't think we can have them see it. I think they'd like that.
I don't know if that's true.
Wow.
So I feel better, feel good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So today we're here to talk about transformation. We've got Mark Brinkmann. Mark Brinkmann's one of the elders here at Freshwater Church. And looking at transformation, remodel of a home, being in a gym, sometimes you can see those results pretty quick. Mm-hmm. But we want to look at transformation in the sense of what does it look like to watch God work in a life for, multiple years. Yeah. In the case of Mark, for his entire life. And so, Mark, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Glad to be here. Thank you, guys.
Mm-hmm. So, Mark, tell us a little bit just about yourself, your family, your kids, how many you got, who they are, what's their name, what do they do, what's life look like for you in that arena?
Yeah, so Linda and I have been married for 41 years this May.
Congratulations.
That's awesome.
Can we edit out how long it took me to come up with the right number?
Nope. We'll put it in 2 times speed for that. It'll look faster.
So we have 5 kids. And they're all out of the house. 4 of them are married. And they're all walking with the Lord, which is a tremendous blessing. Because I see people around me my age that I consider to be better parents than I was.
Wow.
Who didn't turn out quite as lucky as I did. And so that's a real blessing from the Lord that Linda and I hold dear. I live in Wardsville. Linda and I do. We've lived there now. We built that house in 1996. We moved to Jefferson City at that time. I took a job in October of 1995 with Diamond Pet Food. So I grew up on a farm, hog farm. We didn't have a lot of money, but if you're a farmer, you're never really poor, right? Because you've got all your food right there. You just don't have a lot of money. You don't have a lot of money for the extras. My mom and dad, I was the youngest in my family. My dad was 42 when I was born, so he was born like in 1919. My mom was 1922 when she was born, which is older than most people's grandparents, right?
So early enough that they got to not only experience the Great Depression, but they probably remembered it.
They lived it.
They lived it.
They lived it. And it affected them, scarred them in many ways from a standpoint of just the idea that there was no federal safety nets back then. They would have people that would walk past their home with a gunny sack asking for food almost on a daily basis.
Oh, wow.
my dad would say, my grandpa would, he would have a bushel of potatoes he would keep right there by the front door that he would give people.
So you
food.
got nothing, but you're still giving something away.
Yeah.
And so how that translated into their lives was it was just you never knew when it was going to happen again, is what they kind of carried with them. And so the idea of borrowing a lot of money for depreciating assets, you just kept it one more year. Dad was very good with fabricating metal, so a lot of the stuff that we used on the farm were things that he built himself, and my mom made her own clothes, right? Never had outside of McDonald's, I never ate in a restaurant with my folks until I was out of college. My mom lived her entire life, never got on a airplane. She was only out of the state of Missouri a couple of times. Now, my dad, after my mom passed, she died in the early 90s, and he lived until like 2009. So he did some things after he retired and flew to Israel. He was a member of Concord Baptist Church here in Jeff City. So I graduated from the University of Missouri with a degree in animal science, and took a job right away out of college with Ralston Purina in St. Louis. And the reason I think that's important in this area of transformation is I graduated right in the middle of the Reagan recession. I was in an off semester graduate at University of Missouri. I graduated in December of 1982. I graduated early. There were 125 of us in that class, and only 7 of us had a job.
That's crazy.
And everybody else was heading to the restaurants, wait tables. But I remember when I interviewed with people that fall of 1982, no one was hiring. And they were just coming out to the university to interview, to see, just to make connections with some people like me. But we were all so desperate for work that we would sleep at the agricultural school on the sidewalk so that we could be one of 20 people that could be interviewed the next day by Cargill or Continental Grain or Ralston Purina or whoever it was, only to be interviewed knowing that no one's going to hire you, right? So you're sleeping on the sidewalk for the chance to talk to people that don't want to hire you.
You're Hugh Jackman in The Greatest Showman, standing there trying to get a job.
So
That's right.
And so I used that opportunity knowing that these people probably aren't that interested in hiring me right away. They would ask me a few questions about my background, but then they would always give me the opportunity to ask them questions. And so I would use that opportunity to give my testimony. Linda and I met. She was a freshman that last semester of school for me, and I was a senior, and we met in Campus Crusade for Christ. And she started coming. A girl in my class that was in her sorority invited her to come, and she just was immediately all in with following the Lord. I mean, to this day, I've never met a woman that was that passionate about seeking God. And then, of course, that inspired me to, caught my eye and all that. And so we were in a Campus Crusade meeting, and we'd kind of broken up in groups, and we were working through this 4 spiritual laws. I don't know if you guys know what those little booklets were from the past. That's how we shared the gospel at that time. And so we were practicing, and she and I were sitting back to back, and I was one of the people that were up on stage every week, and so she knew who I was. And I could see that she had a question. I said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" And she smiled at me, and I've never been the same since. So
Mark was like, "Will you marry me?"
That's where that started. But these things that I was doing on campus that was always a question. What are the things you do as hobbies? What are the things that you're passionate about? And so I'd always talk about my faith with these people that were interviewing me. And some of them were engaging on that. Some of them didn't want to hear it, right?
Yeah.
It's always that way today, right? We cast the seed, and some of it's a hard path, and
That's right.
some of it's a shallow path. Some of it's a crowded path where people are too busy to listen. And then there's some soil that's ready for it. And so the guy from Ralston Purina was that fourth type of soil.
He was ready.
And so we had a good long talk with a guy that had no intention of offering me a job. But in February, they called back, and this guy remembered me. I don't think he remembered anything else about me but my testimony. But he put me on the list to interview for a job in St. Louis. And I don't know how many resumes they had, upwards of 200 resumes for that job. And I got picked out of the pile and moved to be one of the few that got an interview that day, and I landed the job.
And what kind of job is this? What
I was a feed formulator. And so I remember the guy that I was going to be working for, he had the first interview with me, and he goes, "Now you're interested in this kind of work?" And I said, "Oh, I'm passionate about it."
Good answer.
Had no idea
You have to be.
what I was. I had one operations research class that had linear programming, and I probably got a B- or something in that, but I said, yeah, absolutely. I want to do this. I've been thinking about doing this all my life.
Ever since I was 5.
What I learned, and that was the first time it happened for me, I learned that God is not nearly as interested in where I'm going to work as who I am.
Amen.
And I mean, I think even in evangelical circles, there's going to be differences of opinion on the sovereignty of God and that kind of thing. But I honestly think the same thing about marriage. I'm not sure God is as concerned about me as to who I married as to what kind of husband and what kind of a spiritual leader I was. And Linda, the same thing. I think he had the same outlook for her, that he was not as concerned that she would choose to marry me as the choice she made with a godly perspective.
Mark just shattered the dreams of half of the books that were written while we were in student ministry about God has one person picked out for you.
Yeah, I would probably reject that after.
I would too.
I think we're all in that camp.
Based on my limited circumstances, I would reject that. And my next job, the livestock business was contracting because farms were becoming fewer, bigger farms, fewer numbers of farms. So they had all the leverage, and feed manufacturing had very little leverage. And so our profits were shrinking every year. And I knew I needed to get out of it, but what do I go to, right? So I wanted to go to something that was somewhat transferable, where I could transform into something else, but not have to start from scratch. And so the pet food category, was that avenue for me.
Yeah.
And once again, there was someone in my church in St. Louis, a church that we helped start, that took a job with Hill's Pet Nutrition. It's a division of Colgate, and they were in Topeka. And so he helped me get a job there. Again, something that I had in my faith, in my spiritual side of my walk, that helped me to get a job with a really good company at that time. And
yeah, that's awesome.
And moved forward into pet food for 4 years. And so my mom had passed away about a year before I left and moved to Topeka with Linda. And we had 3 kids at that time. And I got a very good background there. I was fortunate enough to train with a guy that founded the company, and he had sold the business. Hills had been a co-packer for the Morris family. He owned all the rights to those foods. So he had a 4-year contract where they were going to phase him out of the business. They didn't want him to leave immediately because he had too much knowledge, too much equity that needed to be passed on. And so he hired some people, me being one of them, that was there to learn how to do one aspect of his knowledge, which was how to formulate pet food. And there were some other people around him too. He was very dogmatic, very difficult to disagree with, which made me perfect because I had no experience in pet food. I didn't disagree with him on anything.
You're always right.
I was always just
Sounds good to me, boss.
nodding, keeping my ears open and nodding my head.
Yeah.
And we became very close. We would golf together, and I would have to give him 2 strokes a hole. You know how hard it is to win at golf if you have to give somebody 2 strokes every hole?
Yeah, I know. We went about a month ago.
I carried you.
Yeah.
These last 2. Yeah.
He was a private pilot. He
Okay.
had a plane. He had a Beechcraft twin engine, and we would fly all around the country. And he loved to do that with me in tow because that made it something he could charge Hills back for, all those expenses.
Oh, yeah.
Gosh, I went through all kinds of poultry processing facilities and around the country. I learned the business. I really did. And that was a good 4 years for me. When he left, I had this opportunity to come back to Missouri. Diamond Pet was a company that I'd never even heard of. It's so small at that time. But they were located just outside of Jefferson City. My dad had retired in Jefferson City. My kids didn't have a grandparent other than him. Linda's parents had both passed away before she was even 12 years old, so we didn't have any grandparents on her side, but we had my dad on my side, so the opportunity to come back home. And I never really fit into a big company very well. One of the things that I needed to have happen to me was to get a pretty good dose of humility, which I'd never really found yet. Working in big companies, I tended to speak my mind. And you can't move up in a big company speaking your mind. The people that make it spent their life never saying the wrong thing. And that's not the way I ever rolled, especially at that age. And so when I came to Diamond, I came for this opportunity to be closer to my dad. My kids could have a grandparent, and I also came here with the opportunity to put into place some of my own ideas about how a business should be run. And so this is the last job I've ever had. And my first job, I never got promoted. I didn't get promoted at Purina to get into pet food. I had to leave Purina to go to Hills to get into pet food. I never got promoted at Hills. I got different job titles, you know, whatever.
Lateral movements.
That type of thing, where they can justify a pay increase by giving you a little bit something different in your title. But I never got promoted. Then I got moved to Diamond Pet, and I reported to the owners immediately.
So you've never been promoted
I've never
again?
been promoted again.
So an interesting question for you. You get a degree in ag science.
I did do my master's while I was in St. Louis at night.
Okay. And
So
cool.
I got an MBA.
So when you're going to college, and so you've gone down this pet food path, which we'll unpack here in just a second a little bit more. But what would have been your dream job before this? You know, before it's Reagan and there's nobody hiring, and you're going to take whatever you can get. Yeah, I've been dreaming about this my whole life. But what were you like? What are you dreaming about when you?
You know, I wanted to be able to have a job where I could provide for my family better than, you know, my dad and mom were able to provide for me when I came out of college. They loved me dearly. They gave me faith, which you can't repay. But, you know, I worked my way through college. I worked, I had a job at UPS. At night, unloading trucks.
I did that
at
as well.
The UPS place on Paris Road, and still there in Columbia. 1981, I'm making $11 an hour. That's big money back then.
Yeah.
That paid for my tuition and my room and board. So I liked the idea of being able to allow my kids to maybe not have to work that hard. I mean, 10:30 p.m. to 2:30 a.m. every night.
Yeah.
That's a long 3.5
Class start today.
years. Yeah.
Goodness.
So that I really, for a dream job for me was just to have something where I could, my kids' lives would be better than mine.
Yeah.
That's very contrary.
Wasn't
to
any, go ahead.
This is contrary to what, honestly, what my generation was told. You have to do something you love.
Dream it, you can do it.
Yeah, and I love the motivation behind that. I don't care what I do. I just want to be able to provide for my family.
That's interesting you say that, Drew, because I get asked by the animal science department at the University of Missouri to lecture every year because they don't get much pet food input. Most of the endowments that come into land-grant universities and agriculture are from the big animal area.
Yeah.
Pork Council, Poultry Federation. Those are the people that chair all those spots. And so there's not much pet food teaching that takes place in an animal science department. And there's a lot of good opportunity in the pet food category for animal nutritionists, for veterinarians, things of that nature. So they bring me in and they let me talk for about an hour. And then there's always question and answer. And I've had this question more than once. I don't get it every year, but someone will say, how are you able to find a job where you can use your gifting? Because I can really, I can tell Mr. Brinkmann that you're really gifted at what you do. And I always answer it the same way. I said, in any given week, I probably get to use my gifts 20% of what I do. The other 80% is a grind.
Yeah.
I have to work. Part of my job is working on some legal matters that we might be dealing with. I don't like that. I'm not gifted in that. I'm not necessarily gifted in leading employees, but it's part of what I'm responsible to do. And so you have to have the mindset that you may not be in your dream job right out of college, but you can learn what are the things that that energize you is a good way to say it. One of the things I heard in a spiritual gift talk once was that when a person is exercising their spiritual gift, one of the ways you can know that it's your spiritual gift is because it never drains you. Most of the time, even when you're 10 hours into the day, if you're exercising your spiritual gift, it energizes you. And I think there's a certain amount of truth to that, to finding the thing that you like to do that energizes you more than it drains you. But you may not be able to find that right out of school, and don't let that discourage you. Get on the path. Get working towards it, and as you're going, you might learn that what you thought was your dream job really wasn't. And you find something along the way that energized you.
When I went to Midwestern, I married my wife in 2011, and going from my bachelor's to my master's degree. When I get to Midwestern, I tell Hannah I want to be a professor. I want to teach at seminary. And my wife looks at me and she goes, "Why?" And I was like, "Because I think that's what God's called me to do. I want to be a professor." And she goes, "You're a pastor. Why do you want to be a professor?" And I was like, "What does she know? I know what I need to be." And so I start down this path of trying to be a professor, and Hannah convinces me to put in a resume at a church. And so I put in one resume at one church, and I say, if this church hires me, then I'll be a pastor. First Grand Valley called me, hired me as their pastor, and I said, I guess she knows more than I think she did. And it's interesting how we can have one perception of what we want to do with our life, but God really is the one that's in charge. And I think about that today, and I'm like, there's no way I'd be as happy teaching in a class as I would be preaching and leading and doing those things. So it's interesting, Mark, how God can take that and make it into exactly, we would have never have dreamed it that way, but now you're walking the path that you'd go, I wouldn't do this any different than I've done it.
So what I really kind of discovered along the way, discovered it more at Hills than anywhere, was project management. That was the 1992. It's really when the personal computer became affordable, and commonplace for normal people to have in their home. And the Microsoft programs really came front and center.
Yeah.
Excel, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint. There was another software that was out there before that called Lotus 1-2-3, but it was a spreadsheet. That's all it was.
That's right.
And then you had another one that was kind of a word processing software. Word Perfect, I think, was the one that had a lot of the market share.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then there was, but what Microsoft did, they came in and they said, we'll sell you the spreadsheet and we'll throw in the Word and we'll throw in the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
They bundled it all together for about the same price, and it basically just blew their competition right out of the market. Word Perfect is gone. Lotus 1-2-3 was gone, you know. And I learned that I was really energized when I would work spreadsheets, and then I could easily transfer that to a project software like PowerPoint. It communicated really well what Microsoft did. And so I learned that was something that I really enjoyed. And I could do it all myself. I didn't have to have anyone help me.
Yeah.
So I learned that's kind of what I was good at, that I could lead and I could lead projects and things of that nature. What I had to learn was when I came to Diamond was could I lead people? That's a whole nother transition.
What was the hardest part about learning to lead people?
The hardest thing about learning to lead people is being able to adapt to the fact that very few people work at the level that I do and have the all-in aspect of I'll do whatever it takes to make this work, and I'll stay as late as I need to stay. I'll work as hard as I need to work. And I was never the smartest person in any platform that I've ever been in, school, work, but I always felt like I was top 5% on being willing to put in the time. So another thing that I learned about just working with people is motivation. How do you motivate people? And I learned that I could not do that. I could not motivate people by asking people to be motivated. And one of the things that struck me, I had read a Civil War book, and you guys probably think of this too. You watch these guys standing out on the line. This was, the tactics of military was always way behind the technology. And these guys, in the first parts of the Civil War, they're out there standing like they were in the Revolutionary War, And now you've got these cannoneers that can
blow up.
Right, and you got better guns and all of this. But these guys are Why would these guys just not turn around and just run for the trees?
See you later.
And the reason is because these guys always, in fact, went to war with their neighbors. And so if you turn around and run, you're running with your neighbor watching on, who, if he lives through this thing or if he writes a letter back home, you risk the shame of the fact that you were a coward. All right. So that's self-motivation.
Yep.
And so what I thought about is the best way to create motivation is through self-motivation. Well, how do you create self-motivation? It's to allow people to be judged by their peers. Okay, so a very practical thing that I can tell you that I did was we had issues with damages in loading trucks. Where people were careless with the forklift and they might punch a hole in the bag, and so the truck arrives and we get notice from the customer, hey, I had 5 broken bags. Please give me credit for that. So we give them full credit for that kind of thing. So the idea of just going down and say, hey guys, we're breaking too many bags. I want to motivate you to do better is a 100% failure. But if you put some steps in place to where you capture and you have a paper trail for every truck that's loaded, and you know who loaded them.
Yeah.
And then on the backside of that, you get the credits for those particular loads. You can chart what everyone's responsible for. Now, you wouldn't be able to do it specific because you have more than one person on a shift.
Sure.
But basically, we would have 4 shifts, and I would graph that. Here's this month's breakage. Nobody's names on it. We just have A, B, C, and D shift, and I would hang it in the break room. And it's amazing. After you start doing that, you watch how people became self-motivated to not break a bag, to be more careful.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be the response. And it's better. I think it was actually better to not list names.
Yeah.
To where, if I screw up, I'm bringing down all 4 guys on my shift.
Yeah.
Mark just took the shame culture of high school athletics and applied it to business economics.
That's what we have in our group that works out.
the weight room.
I will never miss a day, Mark, not because like I'm sick, or I'll go even when I'm sick, because the shame that I would have from these guys that I go work out with, it's not worth it. I'll be puking and I'll still go just because I don't want to deal with their text messages of calling me a weakling and a wimp for not coming.
Yeah,
it's self-motivation.
Lose those gains.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, but
awesome.
there are things that you can do as a leader that, you hear these business phrases, these catchphrases, empower people. Okay, well, what does that mean? That means to be able to encourage a person to look within themselves, find the motivation, and to do better, to become more. And they can do so in an environment where they can trust their leadership. Yeah. You don't have leadership that you can trust, that they're either going to take all the credit when I do something right, and if something goes wrong, they're going to distance themselves from the wrong and they're going to pin it on me. Yep. That's toxic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those are the 2 things that I started grasping as I moved along. And Diamond started growing. We continued to grow. We built a second facility in my fourth year there. We outgrew our original facility here in Meter, Missouri, and we put a facility in Lathrop, California. The purpose of that was our biggest customer was Costco Wholesale, and back then, 80% of Costco's business was between Vancouver, Colombia, and Tijuana, Mexico. They were just very heavy on the West Coast. Walmart was just really kicking their tail on the East Coast all the way around to Texas. Costco just didn't have the mojo yet to grow there. But they did have some businesses up in the East Coast, but most of it was on the West Coast. And so we built out there. And then our business, we outgrew that facility 5 years later. So 2003, we built our 3rd facility just north of the Columbia, South Carolina airport, a little town called Gaston. So workforce there, not as same level as what we've been accustomed to, not quite as educated. So we had a bad recall in 2006. We had what was called a mold, an aflatoxin, got into the kibble. It was not to any fault of our policies and procedures. It was just we had a rogue employee that took a bribe to unload something that had been rejected in a previous shift. So, and it was bad. I mean, it made national news at one point, and NBC Nightly News teased it, coming in advertisements coming up to their 5:30 news program. Then they teased it throughout the segment, and we were the last story of the night.
They hammered you.
They hammered me. Yeah. And I was the person that was doing all these interviews with media outlets at that time.
Oh, goodness.
And so I mean, we really got hammered on that deal. I remember we had an off-site recall center in Columbia, and I was spending my work days up there helping them manage that. And I drove into the parking lot the next morning, and the building manager came out, and he was white as a sheet. Evidently, the phone calls that our office was getting shut down the trunk lines because they were something like 1,200 phone calls an hour that we were getting. And it was because NBC News had basically used us to get some dramatic ratings, that kind of thing. And they misled the viewers by suggesting that this was a nationwide recall, when actually we were only east of Ohio in certain states. And so I talked to our PR guy that we were working with, and I said, his first name was Jim. I don't remember his last name now. I said, Jim, I can't do taped interviews. These guys are using us for their own purpose.
Yeah.
I said, I'll do a live interview. He goes, well, those things are pretty risky. I said, what do we have to lose at this point?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So he got me on the CNN morning show, and they were willing to do a live interview. I think back then, 2006, it was Soldan O'Brien, was the lady, and she had another guy. His last name was O'Brien too.
Mm-hmm.
And they did this morning show together. And I drove into St. Louis the night before we were going to shoot it over. I had to go over to the PBS station.
Okay.
And do a satellite hookup type of thing. So the night before, the producer calls me, right? And she says, I just wanted to introduce myself and just trying to give you the logistics of how this is going to work. And I kind of, at some point, I just interrupted her. So I said, listen, do you really want to help these people? There are people out there that are hurting, that we, the company, would really like to help.
Yeah.
Despite what you might have heard about us, that's not the people I work for.
Yeah.
People I work for are a stand-up group of people, very compassionate. They're distraught about this situation. We want to help the people that are suffering.
Right.
And she said, okay, well, what would you like to do? And I said, I would just like to have a split screen, and you have a graphic on one side that has a map of the United States, and you color in the states that I'm going to tell you in a few minutes are the ones that are affected, so that all these people from Illinois and from Michigan, all these other people that are calling, will stop calling, so these people that actually have a problem can get through. Yeah. That's all we want you. That's all I'm asking for.
Yeah.
She goes, well, what do I get in return? I said, I'll answer any question they ask.
Yeah.
I won't dodge anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so she agreed to this.
Yeah.
And of course, all of this is happening in prayer.
Mm-hmm.
I had actually, after this thing happened with NBC, I had met with a friend of mine, and we talked about the grace of God on a Sunday night at a coffee shop. And this is what he taught me that night about the grace of God. He goes, you're only going to get through this by the grace of God. And I said, I know that, Ken. I mean, I'm praying about it. And he says, no. Here's how I want to explain it to you. What are you going to do tonight after you leave here? I said, I'm exhausted. I'm going to go home. I'm going to go to bed. He goes, okay. When you get in the car, pray that God will give you the grace to get to where you sleep. And when you lay down to go to sleep, pray that God will give you the grace to sleep until morning. And then when you get up in the morning, pray that God will give you the grace to make it to noontime. Are you starting to understand what I'm saying? Then you pray for the grace to get from noontime. You don't pray to God for grace to get you through this event. Yeah. That's not how you should be doing this. You live hour by hour when you go through these kind of things.
What a good friend.
No kidding.
And I took that to heart.
Yeah.
And so I'm praying, Lord, get me through the night so that I have energy for this. That's all I prayed for when I went to bed that night. Yeah. And when I woke up, I was like, Lord, just get me through this interview. Get me till 10 o'clock in the morning with your grace. Yeah. I'm not going to pray for anything past that.
Wow.
And so I sit down for the interview. The very first question out of the gate was pretty similar to NBC News. How could you let this happen? What are you doing for these people that are suffering? And I just came out and said, if someone can conclusively show that our food harmed their pet, we're going to cover 100% of that cost.
Yeah.
No questions asked.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that kind of diffused everything that they had
It's like,
after that, because they were kind of expecting me to kind of dodge that a little bit. Well, first of all, we're not really sure that we're at fault here. Well, I didn't do any of that.
yeah.
You just, if we're at fault, the family wants to make things right with everybody that's been harmed. And I didn't go through how we were innocent in this matter, that this was something that a supplier had done to us. I never said any of that. We didn't, in that entire event, the month or so that took place, did we ever throw anybody else under the bus. We just took responsibility
You
for
live
it.
by your own principle that you just shared earlier.
That's right.
You take the responsibility for it because people don't want to follow leadership that blames. Nobody wants to follow people like that. Nobody wants to engage with somebody like that. And so that's how we got through that. That's where I got a pretty good dose of humility that stuck with me. The most we had some bad situations with some of the contacts that we had with people. I got a letter that the harshest letter that I got was from a policeman, actually, out of the state of New Jersey. I mean, profanity laced, threatening letter that I kept on my desk in my top drawer. So anytime I opened up the drawer to get an ink pen, I would see how important it was to be humble and to know that any day, I might end up having to go through something as bad as this, and to be thankful to the Lord for the day that you've got, and not pretend that any of this is my doing. The success, whatever you want to call it, it's always going to be the hand of the Lord.
And obviously it didn't, you got through it, and
We got through it.
The company has continued to grow, and so what happens after that?
So we grew to the point where we needed another facility on the West Coast, and so we built a second facility in 2012, just about 30 minutes away from the facility that we originally built out there. We had, one of our bigger customers was Costco Wholesale. They were the strongest, most dominant player in the wholesale club arena. They dominate that. A lot of people, if you live around here, when you think wholesale clubs, you think Sam's Club.
That's right.
Sam's Club doesn't.
Do you have any power to get us a Costco in Columbia? Because I've
that's
signed that
interesting.
petition already.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Costco's, if you look at their demographics, they've got to have a pretty solid population base. They like to cluster their locations for not so much for the purposes of hard goods, but for the purposes of fresh.
Gotcha. Like shipping easier, I assume.
Well, you got a truckload of fresh vegetables. You want to be able to drop it.
Gotcha.
2 or 3 locations. It's $100 to a trucker normally charges like $100 to do a drop. And if you got a lot of space in between drops, so the Springfield, Missouri location is kind of an anomaly for Costco, because you don't have another Costco until you get to Kansas City or till you get to St. Peter's. It's kind of out there in an outpost. So Fargo, South Dakota is a Costco that's really expensive for them to logistically manage because of that. I'm getting off track, but we were very fortunate to have our wagon hooked to them. We also have our wagon hooked to Tractor Supply.
That's good.
which became the most dominant farm and fleet retailer in the country, right? So we've had some good fortune with the people that we've determined to partner up with.
Yeah.
But being privately held has a lot of advantages to it.
I'm sure.
You don't ever have to worry about a stock price, right? There's always the temptation that anytime something bad happens, whether it's your input costs go up from inflation, or if your business suffers and you're not getting the sales that you thought you were going to have, the first thing you want to do is raise your prices to make up for that. And if you're someone that's in a publicly owned company, you have to do that to support the stock price. But if you're not, you can weather the storm. And we're a top line company. We don't worry about our margins as much as we worry about, or we're concerned with just always driving sales, more sales, because the more sales you have, the more inputs that you buy, and you can take that higher scale of inputs and leverage that to lower your costs by the volume that you have.
Yeah.
That's a different perspective than saying, well, we need to maintain a certain margin. Why don't we do this? Why don't we drive sales and see where our margins come out? Now, you can't lose money, but you do have the opportunity as a privately held group to weather adversarial business conditions more so than somebody that's got to protect their job, a lot of people that are in the top management tier of these publicly traded companies, sometimes 60 to 80% of their compensation are stock options. Right? So they're not going to let that stock suffer.
Yeah.
And, I've been in this position for 30 years now, working alongside Shell and Camp Peter members that own the company. So when people come to Diamond Pet, whether it's on our sales side or whether it's on my side, which is the vendor side where I work with the inputs, they see the same face every year. And you can build that credibility, you can build that relationship, as opposed to bigger companies, they have a lot of turnover.
So much,
right? And part of it's purposeful. They want someone to have that they see a lot of promise in. They want that person to have a full understanding of the business. So they'll let them work for a season at a manufacturing plant, then they'll move them to the office, and they might move them overseas. They're doing all kinds of things with them to give them that. But they're never it's really hard to build rapport and relationships with people in 2 years.
Let me ask kind of a different line of questioning. Look more like kind of like your spiritual growth timeline. So, when salvation, you grew up in a Christian home. Your parents went to, or at least your dad went to Concord. When did you come to faith? What did that look like? By the time you get to college, you're sharing the gospel and using the 4 spiritual laws. Meet your wife there. But what did salvation? How old were you? How did God do that?
I'm one of those people that can't pinpoint the day. I can tell you this. When I was 14, neighbor family, their daughter was getting married, and we were friends of that family, and so they had a kind of a dinner one night when the prospective groom was there, and they just wanted friends of theirs in the community to meet him, and so I get there, and there's a lot of women there, and he's kind of a fish out of water. He's not from that area, and so after dinner, we kind of pair off and have a conversation on kind of walking along, and so he asked me directly if I was a Christian. No one ever asked me that before.
Wow.
Presbyterian church that I grew up in. Not a lot of the gospel, like you would have in at a freshwater type of situation. Discipleship was never discussed, right? So I I gave him an answer that was really pretty terrible. And he didn't rebuke me and say, why is a person like you saying you're a Christian when you can't even tell me what a Christian is? He didn't do that. Mm-hmm. He just calmly just said, hey, a Christian is someone who recognizes that they're a sinner, and they recognize that Jesus died on the cross for your sins, and that if you believe in him, your sins can be forgiven. And it wasn't any more detailed than that. Didn't talk about propitiation or justification or any of these things that you guys talk about every day. But it clicked with me. Okay, that's what I've been missing. And I do remember my life shifting at that time. And so if I were to put a peg on the board, that's where I would put it. And I was, I got through high school without any real youth group encouragement or anything like that. But I knew that I desired it. And so when I got to college, that's the first thing that I kind of went out and looked for, was some Christian community where people were really, I wanted to be around someone that was excited about their faith. I'd never been around anyone my age that had that. Yeah. And so, I got into a discipleship group, and my faith kind of took off from there.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So I know the Mark of the last really 5 or 6 months. I'm kind of the new guy here. And what's different about the Mark on day one of Diamond than the Mark today?
Well, I mean,
spiritually speaking,
the humility was a really big part of that.
Yeah.
And I've always had this deal about being a problem solver. So that if you see a problem, someone brings you a problem, okay, well, we're gonna fix it. Before you leave my office, we're gonna have this thing fixed. So I see some of that in Robert too. I see him as being a problem solver. And there's a lot of altruism to that. You want people around you to fix problems. Then you have that story about Mary and Martha, right? Do we need Marthas in our church? Yeah, we better have them. We're not going to have another event here if we don't have these Marthas that are willing to roll up their sleeves and come alongside of us, elders and deacons and that kind of thing. But what I learned is that sometimes if you just take a few steps back, problems can solve themselves. I forget you might remember the quote, but somebody would pray, and if you journal your prayers, the prayers that you pray on Monday about something that you're totally anxious about, you get to Wednesday and something happened and you find out, well, I don't know that I really needed to be that anxious about it to begin with. So that is not something that you have when anyone's young. That is something that you do get over time, where you see, I'll have someone come into my office when I'm my first year at Diamond. This guy is doing this down there and it's a problem. And so, okay, well, I guess I better go talk to him right now. And I'll go down and talk to that person. When now I hear this kind of thing, I'm going to take a much more gradual approach. Okay, well, now that I'm aware of it, I'm going to watch this for a while, and I'm going to see if I see what you see, and then I'm going to, I'm not going to be that person that goes out and immediately tries to solve things.
And now I'm going to try not to.
Yeah, good luck. Well, we're problem makers, so there's going to be has to be a problem solver.
There's some real wisdom in being the Mary, where you sit and you pray about things and you let you let things simmer for a few days before you get up and now go about the task of work. Yeah. You know, one of the things where Linda is really good for me is I'll be going through something with her, and that I don't know why I don't anticipate it. I do sometimes, but it's going to come. Is, well, have you prayed about this? You know, and I want so much to just fib and say, well, yeah, of course, I've been praying for this for the last 5 weeks.
I've always been praying about
It's like your first job. You've been doing this job my whole life.
But
Passionate about it.
She's so right.
Yeah.
You know, and you see this throughout Scripture. You know, that who do you see as being the workaholic in the book of Acts? Paul. Yeah. Type A, textbook type A. Right. But how many times do you see where they had they prayed and they fasted before they established elders in Antioch? You know,
Someone's in jail. They're praying.
Always asking. You know, and on top of this, I have the burden of the needs of the church. And you'll say, who falls into sin where it's not something that grieves me? He's always bathing his mission in prayer, and he's as far as I'm concerned, in the New Testament, there's a purpose. Jesus was very purposeful. After that, it would have to be the Apostle Paul. Yeah. You know,
yeah.
I'm going. I got to see Rome. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go do this. He was very purposeful in his approach, and God would sometimes just slam the door. No, you're not going to do that. I'm going to give you a vision about a guy that's going to say, "Come over to Macedonia."
There had to be some prayer there.
Yeah,
you can't go through Asia, or you can go through it, but don't say a word about Jesus.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, hey, Mark, when you're describing all of this, and I know you, and you travel a ton, and I can imagine when you were younger, you probably traveled more. So how did that balance look like in your family, and also keeping a really busy schedule?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, you have to marry well.
That's good.
You know, and
good advice.
Fortunately, all 5 of us in this room can say that we have.
Amen.
And that's out of Proverbs. A woman who fears the Lord is a gift from God.
That's right.
Doesn't say a woman that fears the Lord, if you marry her, you did your homework. No, it's a gift from the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
You sit back and you sing His praises for blessing you in that way. So you have to have a partner that you come together with, and Linda and I just had some understandings.
Yeah.
You know, she has a teaching degree. She's certified in the state of Missouri, but she hasn't taught since our first child was born in 1986. She's worked from home, and that's how we divided things up. You know, and so I did travel quite a bit back in those. I was gone probably. I'm not going to say 2 weeks a month. I'd say closer to 8 days a month.
Okay.
And every month, though.
Yeah, every single month.
And I didn't make it to every kid's practice or ball game. Mm-hmm. But when I traveled before school, I would call. And I would call Linda would know when I was going to call. I would call at 7 o'clock. Yeah. And I'd get on a speakerphone, and we would pray with our kids for their day, so that they would have that from me while I was on the road.
That's awesome.
And through all those years, I never apologized to my kids when I couldn't be there with them. Mm-hmm. I would tell them I regret it. I wish I could be there. Yeah. But there's purpose to the way we're living our life. We believe this is the way God's called us to live it. Your mom's going to be with you every day. And I'm going to be here every time that I can. And I think that's equally important, is that when you are home, you try to be present, right? You want to be focused. You want to be there. It's very tempting to try and decompress to the point where you want to just shut everybody out.
Yeah.
You have to resist that. Mm-hmm. That's working for your family like you're working for your job. And you can't be any more derelict towards them than you would ever let yourself be for your job.
That's right.
And I don't know, all you guys in here have seen that. Nobody's going to be derelict in your job. Sometimes we think that that's the same. We can then be less purposeful at home.
Yeah.
So when you are home, be present. When I was gone, do what I can and make sure my kids understand that I want to be there.
Yeah.
Caroline's senior night for volleyball, and they had an undefeated volleyball season and a lot to celebrate.
Yeah.
And top operations guy from Costco wanted to tour our Lathrop facility to talk to us about putting in some assets to where we could do some e-commerce fulfillment.
Yeah.
We did not want to have to go down that path, but can I trust that to a plant manager to have that conversation? No. I need to be there. I need to be in California for that. And that was the same night that Caroline had her senior night for volleyball.
Tough. Yeah.
And so I went to California. I called my son Lane. I said, Lane, you're going to walk out there and get the rose from Caroline tonight with your mom because I can't be there. And I talked to Caroline ahead of time and explained the situation. Of course, kids are pretty resilient. You know, they roll with it. And I was short of apologizing to her, though. I said, I would really like to be there, Caroline, but I have to be in California for this. It's something I have to do.
Yeah.
And I think there are some people that would say, well, you know, you made the wrong choice. You know, you should have just trusted God and not been there. But I trusted God that my child wouldn't suffer.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in a farm family. We didn't have the money to hire people.
Yeah.
So in the summertime, we worked until supper time. We ate supper, and then we worked till dark.
That's right.
And I got to sleep in till 6:30 in the morning. Dad was up at 5:30 doing the feeding before we went back out into the field. So he came to, when I played, we had a good high school basketball team. We took second in the state, third in the state while I was there. So a lot of times our games were really crowded. Dad would only make it to the home games.
Yeah.
You know, my mom showed up at my senior night, my last year of basketball, my last game at home. It's the one time she ever saw me play. And I never, ever thought, wow, they don't love me, you know, because I knew that they did because of all the sacrifices they made, that I could even drive the pickup, gas that they're paying for, where I'm late getting my work done at home because I'm doing extracurricular activities at school that they never got to do when they were my age. So I saw that as them sacrificing for me, and it never occurred to me that because they're not helicopter over the top of me, that somehow they didn't love me. And so
I think that's a principle that our culture oftentimes gets wrong with the Lord. When people talk about, you know, well, you just need to trust God with that. When I hear people say that, almost always, when they're using it as some kind of an ammunition, it's you need to trust God to do what you want to do.
That's right. Yeah.
Because you don't ever hear anybody say that when it's, well, you need to trust God, and I'm going to do something I don't want to do. Like I'm going to do that. Like it's, you know, because Mark, it's not like you, given the choice, and there being no repercussions for not going to California, you're going to get the rose from your daughter. But knowing that you have a responsibility and a job, and you have to be there, and that can't be handed to somebody else, you're doing the thing that, in reality, you would less like to do. And I think it's interesting because when we talk about that, well, just need to trust God. And it's like, well, everybody wants to say that, but they use it as like ammunition to do what you want.
Yeah.
And I think trusting God is far more evident when we trust Him for our children to still know that we love them and care for them, even when we're making a decision that may not be the popular one for most people. And that girl, what's she do now?
Caroline is, she got a degree in marketing from Lindenwood University. Met her husband there. They married. Really worked out well because right next door to Lindenwood is Matthias Lot Church.
Yeah.
I believe one of the best churches to be a part of in the state of Missouri. And they just went in all in. And Brandon, her husband, is the director of college ministries there, and Caroline runs a non-for-profit called We Love St. Charles.
So that girl who took a rose from your son,
yes,
and you trusted God, and now she works for the Lord.
Yeah, no, it's. I think the key is that if I'd have done something like, well, you know what, I got invited to go to whatever time of year that was. I got to go to the Final Four. Well, I can't pass that up. Now, if I'd had tickets to the Final Four and this senior night would have fell on the same day, I'm giving up my tickets to the Final Four. No questions asked.
Yep.
No questions asked.
Yeah.
But when the idea is I have a duty that I've made a promise to people that I'm going to hold up and carry my water for you. And now I'm going to say, well, no, I'm not. Yeah. I have something that is more important for my family. I'm going to set an example to my family that it's okay not to do your job when you think that it's interfering with something in your home life. It's just a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't evangelize that part of it too much because some people might interpret Scripture differently.
I agree with you. Just, I believe that principle is one that I live by. Is that.
But one thing that I would say I would do a little bit differently if I were to go back and parent my kids. I was always a pretty good cheerleader for them. Yeah. You know, you're doing well. Yeah. You're doing well in school. You can do better. I've seen it in you. I think you've, in other words, building up their self-esteem, right? It's something that I bought into. Not that there's anything wrong with that, especially if you have a child that suffers in that area.
Yeah.
But whether or not I did that too much or not, let's say that I did it just right. What I didn't do enough was to follow that up with, you know what, those Matt, Amanda, Lane, you need to know that you're broken. You know, you're a broken vessel that needs Jesus desperately. And you know how I know that? Because I need him desperately. Even at my age, you never get past that. Amen. Where you don't need Jesus desperately in your life. Right. That apart from him, you're broken. You're a train wreck apart from Christ. Yeah. And just teaching them that early on, that there's more important things necessarily than the transient athletics and sports. You know, I really see, especially in our community, Jefferson City, I see parents that are really all in with their kids being involved in sports. So much of our sports culture now travels. Mm-hmm. Didn't happen when I was that age. The worst. And the travel, things like wrestling, we have traveling, and baseball in the summer, volleyball in the fall. It's a weekend.
They're even getting traveling football now too.
So you're going to have
all over
tournaments on weekends that spill into Sunday. Mm-hmm. It's commonplace. It was never that way when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And parents embrace that, and they go for it, and they want to do it because they believe in their heart that they're sacrificing for their kids, and they want them to have this experience. Okay. Don't forget to bring alongside that the fact that your kids need to know that they need a Savior.
That's right.
And you're spending all this time building them up in an area of athletics that at the end of the day is transitory.
Yeah.
doesn't follow us into eternity.
That's right.
No, that's good. You can look at that. Well, there's worse things. If I wouldn't, my kids aren't wasting time doing things like that would be no profit at all for their body. They're inside playing video games or watching movies or Netflix or whatever. That's really bad. On their phone all the time. I've got them away from that. I'm doing these things. I get that. But if you're going to be as invested in them and their life, in helping them to grow socially and athletically, my gosh, be invested in them being spiritual, and they have to hear something that's hard to tell them, that you're not all that.
Yeah.
You're not.
Right.
You need a Savior. And I know that because I need a Savior. It never goes away.
It's so good.
Romans, says, do not be conformed to the world, but transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may be able to approve and test what the perfect will of God is. And I think sometimes when we're parenting, if we're not careful, the very things we do as parents are conforming them to the world.
Yeah.
And if we're not careful to have that aspect of how am I transforming the renewing of their mind, even as we're living in the world, is really good. Well, Mark, thank you so much for being a part of our podcast today. We really loved having you, hearing about your life. And I want to close with just one more question, and then we'll be done today. If you could give one piece of advice, we have a lot of young people that I think are, at that beginning stage of their career. They want to be successful. They, if they could dream it, they'd plot a trajectory that's looked like yours in life. And how do they do that? Because I don't think there's anything wrong with being successful. I don't think there's anything wrong with, going out and making a ton of money. But how do they do that in a way, if you could give them one piece of advice, that they could do that and honor the Lord? To where honoring the Lord would actually probably be more important to them than that. But how do these young people that are just coming into the workforce and wanting to do something major with their life, how do they do that and honor God?
That's a great question. My daughter Abigail is one I'll use as an example. She's my fourth child, and she was at the end of her last semester of school. She was working on where she's going to go to school. Where was she going to go? And so she landed on UMKC.
Good school.
And she had some friends at church that were kind of asking her, well, why did you choose that? What was your... And this is before church started that day, and she burst into tears, and she just went out into the foyer. And I followed her out there. And she said, Dad, I don't know why I made this choice, but what if I made the wrong choice? And I gave her that advice. God is not nearly as concerned about where you go to school as to what kind of a person you are. You want to know God's will? We don't have to ask him for it. It's right there in his word. Now, it's not going to tell you where to go to college, but it's going to tell you that when you get to college, this is, follow me. Follow me. And so what I would say to these people is, whatever path you go, first of all, choose a path and go. Yeah. A lot of times you just need to choose that path and move forward, and you'll be like the Apostle Paul. No. I don't want you. I want you to go wait for God to close a door. Just say, God, I'm going, and I am going to let you close the door if this is something that's bad for my relationship with you, and he will. Number 2, always give him your first and your best.
Amen.
Okay, and that's not, we think about money when we think about that first. God doesn't care about your money. God cares about your heart. And the money is a vehicle that he uses to see where your heart is. Because the first thing that you spend your money on every month, that's the thing that you trust the most. It's just how it is. And so when you start out, always give the Lord your first and your best.
That's good.
Move forward. Let him slam the door. But if you're giving him your first and your best, he's going to direct your path. I firmly believe that. He has for me.
Thank you, Mark.
Great, Mark.
Hey, this is the Faith Unfiltered podcast. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time.